All right, well, welcome back. After that tremendous presentation by Vijay, I think that he gave us a lot to think about. And when we, Janessa Stroud and I from the Chamber were working through some of the program details, we thought, okay, we've got Vijay with the global perspective. I mean, what a job, huh? Going around the world and meeting all these people and really experiencing life at that level. But we wanted to bring it closer to home. And so this next session really focuses on the recently released electricity energy plan for the 21st century, issued in early 2007 by the Michigan Public Service Commission. Our guest today will be offering some perspectives on that. Tom Stanton will be joining us first. He is the coordinator of the Michigan Public Service Commission's Michigan Renewable Energy Program and will share some of the observations that relate to that particular plan. Diane Katz, who is Director of Science, Environment, and Technology Policy with the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, will be joining us to give some reflection on that particular plan, as will Ken Sikkema, our former state senator, and now working in a variety of occupations in civilian life, and seems to be enjoying that very well. Ken is a senior policy fellow at Public Sector Consultants and also teaching at Grand Valley State University and director of its Public Policy Institute. I did not say I'm Deb Steckity, and I'm the executive director of the Center for Sustainability and also a full-time professor of sustainable business here at Aquinas College. And we are very excited to have worked with the Chamber on this particular topic. As Vern said, it's not quite purple yet, but we hope that there will be a little shade of purple on all of you as you leave from today. So without further ado, Tom, if you'd be kind enough to give us some observations.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming this morning. It's great to be here, getting up kind of early after the time change to come. I was working on the 21st Century Energy Plan from April until the plan was released in January, and I was the coordinator of the Renewable Energy Work Group and coordinator of the policy task force or policy team that represented both renewable energy resources and what we called alternative energy technologies. But before I give this kind of a talk, I always like to start out with the important disclaimer that I am not one of the commissioners at the Michigan Public Service Commission. I'm a member of the commission staff. I can give you my point of view and my observations and what I believe about our energy situation today. And I can report quite a bit on what is in the 21st Century Electric Energy Plan. But I can't really speak on behalf of the commissioners themselves. They speak through written orders, and that's how all of us learn what the commission thinks about things, is through the orders that they write, or maybe sometimes through reports that are issued like the 21st Century Energy Plan. I know you won't be able to read some of the slides on the board. You're getting a handout now that has half of all these slides in it. In order to save money, of course, at the state now we are constrained, and so I got the handout down to one sheet of paper for you. If anybody wants the whole presentation, all you need to do is email me, and I'll email you back the whole presentation. Anyway, Governor Granholm issued an executive directive in April 2006 directing the Public Service Commission Chair, J. Peter Lark, to prepare for her a comprehensive energy plan. And as it became clear as we got into this effort, it really was an electric energy plan, not an overall energy plan. The state of Michigan has done this before for electricity in 1986. And then again, we did it one utility at a time with Consumers Energy and Detroit Edison in 1988, 89, 90, 91, 92. And then we stopped doing it. We stopped largely in anticipation that the new liberalized electricity market that Vijay was speaking about was going to take care of a lot of these needs, that the markets as they developed would take care of comprehensive planning of the future resources. That didn't work out on the time schedule that I think people initially thought it might, and Michigan finds itself in a situation where we know that we are growing short of electric base load capacity in the state. The governor thought this so important that she directed a planned process to be developed. And we ran through this process, as I said, from April through December. We had about 350 people participate. And one thing I think we're getting pretty good at the Michigan Public Service Commission is establishing a process for anyone who's interested to participate in our government policy development efforts. And in the Michigan Renewable Energy Program, we're wide open. Our purpose is to create a space for dialogue to occur so that people can get together, educate one another, learn about issues, and hopefully come up with really good policy proposals. In this 21st Century Electric Energy Plan process, that's exactly what we did, formed different work groups, invited the public to participate. And as I say, over 350 people participated. I think they represent 160 different organizations in the state of Michigan, and some people participating on their own, not necessarily representing any particular company or any particular interest group. And our goal was to develop a set of policy proposals for the governor and for the legislature on what Michigan could and should do in the short term to enable us to have the kind of energy future that we would like in the longer term. This on the screen is a little difficult to see, but is sort of a summary of all the electric energy planning modeling work that was done. The blue line at the top represents electricity demand in the state of Michigan, and it's growing at a rate of about 1.2% per year. The red line represents demand plus a 15% reserve margin. And we keep, for planning purposes, what's called a planning reserve. Right now it's about 15%. The correct percentage depends on a lot of different variables, including how robust the transmission system is and how big each of the power plants are. As the power plants get bigger and bigger, you always have to have a contingency ready for any one power plant to break at any moment or any one wire to not be available at any moment. And as a result of planning and modeling those contingencies, right now, given the system we have, we think the proper reserve margin is somewhere around 15%. The gray bars represent Michigan's existing capacity for making electricity. And then the red bars that you see growing represent the difference between the electric capacity that we have or will have in the future and the demand that's growing. So the red is what we need to add. We need to build something in order to meet that demand that's shown up in the red bars. The years across the bottom, it starts at 2006 and goes through 2026, I believe. And the reason that the gray bars start coming down is Michigan's existing fleet of power plants averages 47 years old. And a lot of those plants will need to be retired at some point, or they'll need so much investment to restart them and refurbish them that we may as well consider a new power plant. We looked at many, many different planning contingencies and planning scenarios and did some pretty heavy-duty computer modeling for this effort. And the major contingencies that we look at is what happens with the different differential prices of fuels. Natural gas might go up or down, coal might go up or down, and does this happen at the same rate for all the different fuels, or do they move independent of one another? What happens if, as a result of future air regulation, we might see a carbon tax or a carbon cap? So that's the Clean Air Act contingency that we looked at there. What happens with transmission capability? Right now, our transmission capability, because we're a peninsula, we have very few connections coming from the lower peninsula out into the rest of the world, Indiana, Ohio, and Ontario. And those connections can only carry a fixed amount of electricity. We have a limited ability to move power in the state, especially from the west to the east. So we're looking at different transmission increases that are already planned. And then what happens with demand growth? If demand growth is higher than we think it will be or lower than we think it will be, what are the effects of that on our modeling? And we grouped our modeling into several different scenarios Traditional generation is, what if we continue to build more of the same large baseload coal-fired power plants mostly, also some analysis of nuclear for that. The emissions scenario thinks about what happens in a state like Michigan where we're about 60% reliant on coal. If we start to have a climate tax or carbon caps, then how will that affect our price of electricity and how will it affect the demand for electricity? We looked at energy efficiency programming on a statewide scale, renewable energy, all the different types of renewables that might come in and make a significant contribution in Michigan. That's primarily wind and biomass energy in the short run. And we did some scenarios where we combined together all the renewable and the energy efficiency combined together in one scenario. Take a look at what difference that makes. And then the bottom one, combustion turbines only, is what we affectionately call the do-nothing scenario. Since 2000, various private companies, not utilities, but independent power producers, came and built in Michigan 6,000 megawatts of new natural gas-fired combustion turbines. And they were thinking at the time, this is the year 2000, 2001, they were thinking natural gas is really cheap, electricity demand goes really high in the summertime. When the price of electricity goes way up, we can burn this cheap natural gas, make expensive electricity, and make a lot of money really fast. And it was a really nice theory that was interrupted by the change in natural gas price. 3 of the largest of those plants already declared bankruptcy. Most of those plants hardly run at all now because natural gas got so expensive that it doesn't make sense to burn the natural gas to make electricity to sell into an electricity market that's dominated by old, depreciated coal plants. So it's one of the ways that this type of planning, I want to really bring home to you the importance of doing this type of planning, having somebody do it. And maybe that role shouldn't be something that the government should undertake. Maybe your utility company should undertake it more. Maybe private sector people should undertake it. But this energy planning is a big deal and will make a big difference. I've only showed here a couple of the scenarios, and you've got 2 of these pictures in your handout, and there's 3 here on the screen. And what I want to bring home is, in this one, the kind of blue bars over on the right-hand side, every one of those units is a 500 megawatt coal plant. And if we do not bring in energy efficiency and renewable energy, this is what our modeling says we must do. Start building a new coal plant last year, because they take 6 or 7 or 8 or more years to get built and online. So the first one comes in there, I think, in 2013. And then thereafter, at least one a year, every year, year after year after year. This would be the largest construction project ever undertaken in the state of Michigan. And this is equivalent to something like, let's build 2 Mackinac bridges at the same time in the state of Michigan, while Illinois, Ohio, other states around us are also trying to build more and more and more new coal plants. So there's some very serious questions about all the resources, steel, concrete, copper, the workers who would build these plants. What is the capacity to start doing this now, and how much would it cost? The early years, those red boxes, those represent combustion turbines that would have to be built just to meet the reliability concerns and make sure we have enough to keep the lights on while we await the first coal plant that could be built. And then this is what happens as we switch to the energy efficiency scenario. We bring in a lot of energy efficiency, statewide energy efficiency programs, and we modeled this after Wisconsin. So we know this can be done. Other states have been doing it at this kind of a rate for many, many years. We bring in the efficiency, we drop out many, many of these early year power plants. You can see the difference. And then this one, I'm sorry, the colors got changed here. It's the same data as this, but this one is what happens if we bring in energy efficiency plus renewables. And this is the basic finding of our modeling. As the chairman of the Public Service Commission put it when he spoke publicly about this plan when it was released, and as he presented to the legislature, we can go on with business as usual, and that will cost about $4 billion more in the next 15 or 20 years than a plan that relies very heavily on energy efficiency plus renewable energy and fewer of those coal plants. and we'll save approximately $2 billion from a statewide energy efficiency program, another $2 billion from renewable energy resources that could be brought online. So it's kind of important that we do this modeling and that we all work together as a community in the state of interested citizens. This is our future, and it's, I think, important that we don't let it be a spectator sport and that we all participate. It leaves us with very important policy issues. You know, now we have the crux of a plan, a plausible plan, but we have what we call a hybrid electricity market, part regulated, part deregulated, and that makes it hard for anyone who wants to build a new power plant to raise the capital to do so. And there are proposals in our plan for changing the way that we regulate this so that it would allow a utility company, if they wished, to come into the Public Service Commission, get an okay ahead of time to build a new power plant, get the certification ahead of time that a new power plant is needed and that what they plan to do is the right thing to do for the state. And once that decision is made, then don't second guess it later. Let them go ahead, raise the money, build the plant, and you know, a few other changes to make sure that they'll then be able to run that plant, sell the output, and get their money back. Additional legislation will be needed if Michigan is going to move forward with the energy efficiency and renewable energy plans that we've modeled. And we are, at the Public Service Commission, we gave many specific recommendations about the form that legislation should take. And I know a lot of people in the state legislature and at the Public Service Commission are now working on refining that and turning it into specific legislative language. And already some of the bills have been introduced. Others will be introduced in the coming weeks. The action moves to the legislature now, folks. And so I think it behooves anyone who's interested, and I should think that would be a lot of people in this room, to learn about this and make sure that you are contacting your state representative and your state senator and telling them what you would like to see come out of this legislation. The other point that we make is that Michigan Public Service Commission policies need to be continuously reviewed to make sure that we don't become part of the problem, that the way we regulate doesn't stand in the way. And we're constrained by our legal authority, but to the extent that we already have legal authority to make the necessary changes, we think we should go ahead and do that. And to the extent that we need new legal authority, we're going to be asking the legislature to give that to us. If you want to learn more, this is a picture of our main web page. The little green box goes to the 21st Century Renewable Energy Plan. You can go to michigan.gov/MPSC for Michigan Public Service Commission. That's the page you'll see. Click on the green box, and all kinds of documents from the 21st Century Energy Plan will be there. I wanted to stress that even though we did a tremendous amount of work last year, and I know a lot of people will recognize the year before that we worked similarly on what was called the Capacity Need Forum, the first stage of this process. So for 2 years in a row now, we've been engaged in these very extensive modeling processes, but we're not at the end by any stretch. We're just at the very beginning of what needs to be done to move the state forward. Now I want to diverge very briefly and quickly from the 21st Century Energy Plan to lay out just a little bit more about the current energy problems that the state faces. This is a model of global climate change, and I put in yellow, warning, you are here. The climate change will be most extreme at the highest latitudes, north and south, away from the equator. And where you get to the point where Michigan is around the 45th latitude, and we're going to experience a tremendous amount of this climate change that is occurring now. Very, very serious issue. And what the climate scientists are telling us, the best science we have today is we better stop before we get to roughly a doubling of the pre-industrial level of carbon in the atmosphere. And in order to do that, the math basically works out to something like, if we start right away, we could reduce our carbon output by about 3% per year forever, and we would make it here. But I want you to think about that. What is it going to take for each one of us as an individual, for our communities, for a state as a whole, to reduce our carbon emissions by about 3% per year? It is a monumental challenge to the way we do things and the way we have been doing things. and very, very serious change. You may have seen this oil poster already. This is at oilposter.com, I believe it is, on the internet. The next slide, I think, gives that address. It talks about the cheap oil, the easy-to-get oil. And this is, someone asked a question earlier of Vijay about the peak oil theorists and what does he think about that. And I don't think you'll find very much a disagreement between those who say, well, there's lots and lots of unconventional oil that we can still get, and the people who put this kind of thing together who say, yeah, but the cheap stuff, folks, is either already half gone or very, very soon will be already half gone. And that downward slope of what happens when we get and use half the cheap oil, that downward slope is about 3% per year forever. So again, you want to start thinking, how is a state like Michigan, so dependent on our gasoline engines, going to reduce its use of petrocarbons by 3% per year, starting now, forever? A very, very significant challenge. And again, I want to encourage you to think about how to do it in your own life, how to help your community to do it, how to help your state to do it. And if those two massively huge, important changes were not enough to move us into action, you can pick any of these other potential ecological challenges that are facing us and coming, bigger and bigger, faster and faster all the time. Very, very serious changes in the environment being caused by human activity. And unfortunately, I think, or fortunately, humans are going to have to learn to be the managers and the stewards to protect our environment in the future. I've taken too much time, so I'm going to speed ahead here. We live in a world now that's characterized like this image that we call a bow tie graph. I hope you can see why it's called a bow tie graph. And we're in this squeeze period where the natural carrying capacity of the earth and the world and all of the services that we receive from nature are being constrained by a growing population using more and more technology that's more and more harmful to the environment. We're at a point where if those two lines growing from the left, if they cross, that represents something like death. It represents something like collapse of civilization. Very, very serious, very difficult problems. Our goal in this generation is stop them from colliding, hold them apart, and then make nature better again, heal the world to make them move apart again into the future. That's all. It's a very simple task that we can do. And the good news is, and I leave you with this, you've got these references in your handout. Luckily, a lot of brilliant people have been studying these issues already for many, many, many years. So there's already a great deal of very helpful information about what to do and how to do it. And much, if not all of this information, already relies on the classic free market principles that the world so loves now. So we don't need a socialist revolution to make these things happen, but we can use a free market revolution to make these things happen. And I've given you what I believe to be the best 15 or 20 places that you can go now on the internet to learn what to do about these things. So I hope that you find that interesting and helpful, and I'll sit down and look forward to a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for the overview of Michigan's electric energy plan. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes between Diane and Ken giving us some observations that they have on how well does this plan serve us and what are some of the issues that we need to tend to as we consider that. And then we may have, if I keep them on task, a little bit of a time for some questions and responses from our panelists here today. So Diane, if you would join us up here. Thank you.
Good morning. Very grateful to be here today. We at the Mackinac Center take energy policy very seriously. For example, we've spent considerable time and effort analyzing just how many Public Service Commission members it takes to change a light bulb. And it takes 3, 1 to conduct a hearing, 1 to issue an order, and the 3rd to fine utilities for letting the bulb burn out. We've also calculated how many politicians it takes to change a light bulb. The answer is 2, 1 Democrat to change it and 1 Republican to change it back. Finally, we've determined that free marketers like myself have no reason to change light bulbs, because if the government would just leave it alone, the light bulb would change itself. But seriously, the question before us is whether this 21st century plan constitutes sound policy and if it'll benefit the state. Mine is going to be the contrarian view here, I suppose. And my answer to that question is, in a word, no. I don't doubt Governor Granholm's intentions, and I don't underestimate Mr. Stanton's work or that of Chairman Lark's work, but the fact remains, this plan assumes that the superiority lies with government in managing electricity over the knowledge and experience of industry professionals. This plan would substitute political forces for market forces, and that does not constitute sound energy policy. According to Mr. Lark, the absence of this plan would leave Michigan to the, quote, vagaries of the energy market. But this plan would leave us, in reality, to the vagaries of politics. There's no shortage of evidence that government control has artificially inflated energy costs and undermined the reliability of the power supply, both at the federal level and in Michigan. Were it not for regulatory interference, for example, the various cross-subsidies we have would not have skewed the rate structure in this state. And regulatory interference is also responsible for barriers to investment in both generating and transmission capacity. I'll address specific provisions of the plan in a moment, but I want to note at the outset that this plan constitutes a dramatic expansion of Public Service Commission authority. No less than 20 major new regulatory initiatives. And there are numerous instances in this plan where this expanded authority would usurp legislative prerogative. The plan is a little inconsistent internally. It does state, and this is positive, that rates should reflect the actual cost of service. But on the other hand, it characterizes market pricing as, quote, volatile, and calls for regulating rates by customer class to recoup the costs of mandates such as the Renewable Portfolio Standard. Now, lawmakers may be enticed by the claim that the plan will allegedly save power generating costs of $4 billion over 20 years. But as Mr. Lark himself acknowledged, forecasting in this area is particularly problematic. And indeed, the forecast demand in this plan is half what the capacity needs report contained that was issued only a couple months ago. And without due respect to Mr. Stanton, his opinions about global warming and environmental apocalypse are speculative at best. The real purpose of this plan is laid bare, I think, on page 35, where it states, a statewide program will more effectively bring about change in the culture of energy use in this state. And so apparently this plan is intended to manipulate our culture in Michigan. Now, the plan has been characterized as the product of a collaborative process, and even if that were true, such a process is rendered meaningless when the outcome is preordained. And the fact is that with respect to the Renewable Portfolio Standard, the governor's directive initiating the plan called for establishment of a Renewable Portfolio Standard. As justification for this quota, this renewables quota, Mr. Lark contends that every megawatt of electricity generated by renewable sources displaces a megawatt of power generated by fossil fuel. In fact, there is no one-to-one displacement because the inherent variability of renewable energies, like wind, requires spinning reserves. And so there is no displacement. The Renewable Portfolio Standard in particular would put Michigan at a greater disadvantage than it already is in terms of economic growth. were this type of energy affordable and efficient, it would not take a government mandate to bring it to market. And the sudden artificial demand for renewables will strain the existing supply chain, further increasing costs. So just imagine what's going to happen when the cost of wind turbines, what's going to happen to the cost of wind turbines when upwards of some 2,000 are going to be required to comply with the renewables quota. And who's going to pay for the substantial costs of connecting these new supplies into the grid? The only real winners will be the alternative energy suppliers who've been unable to attract the capital investment or consumer interests that they desire on the merits of their product. So this is a wealth redistribution, plain and simple. Now, underlying the RPS concept is the conceit that renewables are environmentally benign, but they're not. Wind power, for example, is very noisy. The turbine blades can be heard more than half a mile away. They require lots of open land, an estimated 2.5 acres per turbine. And transmission lines must be built to connect remote wind farms to the power grid. So constructing a wind farm requires the manufacture of hundreds of tons of cement and steel. And they're called cuisinaires of the air, even by environmental groups, because of the tendency to chop up birds. Solar power is among the least efficient methods of generating electricity. The PV cells absorb at most only about 25% of the available energy. Most of it is lost through heat. And so any large-scale generation of solar requires enormous areas of land. Heating just a typical house would require a collector area of about 200 square feet. The burning of biomass produces more emissions than the combustion of natural gas. And burning most biomass can produce furans and dioxins. And the combustion of solid biomass also produces both bottom ash and fly ash that presents disposal challenges. Now, there's no shortage of human ingenuity to solve these challenges, but policymakers and the public should not assume the inherent superiority of renewables. All forms of energy impose environmental costs of one form or another. I'm going to talk about, real quickly, the energy efficiency program. This would establish a colossal new energy efficiency bureaucracy. The underlying presumption is that consumers and businesses require government to manage their electricity usage. Now, to accomplish this task, the plan calls for instituting a, quote, non-bypassable surcharge amounting to $68 million in year one and rising to $110 million by year three. Now, what is a non-bypassable surcharge? It's a tax. Mr. Lark contends that a centralized bureaucracy will outperform the various voluntary efforts already underway. That's sort of a new twist on the benefits of regulation. But it's also useful to recognize that government control of electricity rates, the variety of special interest subsidies it has created, has thwarted the cause of energy conservation. The most efficient approach to energy conservation is market pricing, which is the most accurate measure of supply. Now, about the appliance standards. Appliances big and small are becoming more efficient as new technology improves every year. And to the extent that market prices reflect the true cost of power, manufacturers will compete for customers based on energy efficiency. So with the time limited, I can't address every element of the plan, but I'll just say one thing about certificate of need, which is part of the plan. If in reading this plan you knew nothing about the electricity industry, it would be reasonable for you to suppose that utilities operate without regard to the future. But even if that were true, which it's not, government is by no means equipped to determine whether a power plant should be built, where it should be built, what type should be built, and all the other decision-making that a certificate of need program entails. I can only hope this has been a little bit helpful. The Mackinac Center is preparing a much more detailed plan our analysis of the plan. We recognize that competitive energy prices and reliable electrical grid are crucial elements to economic growth and job creation. So it's incumbent on lawmakers and the media and the public to carefully consider whether this plan, this policy shift is warranted. Costly new regulation and restrictions on competition in electricity supply would harm rather than benefit Michigan consumers and the businesses that employ them. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, for those observations. And Ken, could you share some of yours now?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's delighted to be here this morning. I am particularly pleased to be listening to the program as the former state senator. Strikes me as that maybe that's the best of both worlds. I get to speak maybe with some credibility on what the legislature should or ought to do, but as the former state senator, I don't have to be accountable for any of it. I did recall a speech that I heard former Governor Milliken give. This is some years after he had left office, I think 10 or 12 years after he had left office, and he gave a speech that I attended in Lansing. And in the question and answer period afterwards, somebody did ask him, this is a true story, what's the best thing about being the former governor, or a former governor? And he didn't miss a beat. He said, and if you got to remember, he left office 1982, very bad economy, kind of a lot like we're in now. And the question was, what's the best thing about being a former governor? Best thing about being a former governor is now when people wave to me on the sidewalk, they use all their fingers. Well, when people wave to me now, they use all their fingers. I'm going to make 5 very quick points, and then we can get into the dialogue or question and answer. I think on the 21st Century Energy Plan, which is what this panel or session is all about, I think they basically got it right. There's a lot to debate about it, and there are some things they didn't talk about that I think will become, in some sense, the focus and should become the focus of public policy in the legislature on electric energy in the months ahead. But in terms of for the first time in Michigan, a renewable portfolio standard, which they suggest should be 10% by 2015. I think they're right about having a mandatory renewable portfolio standard. You could debate the percentage and the date, but I think they're right about that. They called for an energy efficiency program, as Diane mentioned, $68 million in year 1. I think they're right about that. Once again, you can have a debate about whether it ought to be $68 million or more or less, but I think there should be a energy efficiency program here in the state of Michigan. And they called for the construction of a new baseload power plant to come online by 2015, and they're suggesting clean technology coal. I think the evidence I've seen about energy demand in Michigan and what a renewable portfolio and an energy efficiency program can reasonably accommodate in terms of demand, I think they're right about the need for new baseload generation in the state of Michigan. So that's kind of one point I want to make. So I disagree with Diane, I guess, about the sort of the framework of the 21st Century Energy Plan. By the way, I was on a panel with Peter Lark a few weeks ago, and I noted that just a few short months ago, when I was the Republican leader of the Senate, I had a lot to disagree with him and the governor. Now I keep finding things I agree with him on. Second point I want to make, I think the debate over global warming is over. When President George Bush, former governor of Texas and a former oil man, in the State of the Union speech in 2007 stands in front of the American public and the world and, this is my word, capitulates to the science of it, it strikes me there's only 2 people left in America who disagree. One is Diane Katz, and one, I suspect, is Vice President Dick Cheney. You know. But I think the debate is over. I think there will be a carbon tax, and the only question, and I think Vijay was right about this, he alluded to this, the only question now is sort of how it's put together and exactly what it looks like. My third point is kind of bouncing off this. There hasn't been any discussion this morning about it, but there should be about if you are going to have new baseload power plants built, whether in Michigan or in any other state, you need to have a discussion about nuclear energy. Because I think if you assume a carbon tax and you look at the new technology involved with nuclear energy, using nuclear power as the generating force for electric power, I, as Ken Sickman's personal opinion, believe that nuclear compares favorably with other technologies, particularly with the need to deal with global warming. There are 103 nuclear power plants in the country today. The technology for constructing, for generating that power is different than it was even in the 70s and 80s, and it's my hope that there be a good, robust discussion here in Michigan about using nuclear energy. The time frame isn't right for getting one online by 2015, so I think we're almost forced, if you're going to have one, to do it with coal. But there's going to be the need for more generation after that. And I think nuclear generation compares very, very favorably with the competitors. My fourth point is really what I alluded to earlier, where I think the policy debate has to be in Michigan, and that is just hypothetically let's make the assumption that the framework of the 21st Century Energy Plan is right. A renewable portfolio, an efficiency program, and a new baseload plant. I think the question is what regulatory scheme you need to put in place to get you there. As Mr. Stanton had on one of his slides, the current hybrid regulatory system, which was put in place by Public Act 141, passed in the year 2000, is unsustainable. And in the interest of full disclosure, I was the vice chairman of the Senate Technology and Energy Committee when that act was passed, and I supported it and voted for it. But I think the Commission, the 21st Century Energy Plan recognizes, others have recognized that this hybrid system, one foot in the old regulatory system, another foot in the competitive system, is not working. It's not sustainable, and it's very unlikely that you're going to get a baseload power plant built under that regulatory scheme. And I think one of the major issues that the legislature has to wrestle with, and they have to wrestle with it fairly soon, is what kind of regulatory system you put in place to accomplish what you want to accomplish, whether it's renewables, energy efficiency, or new baseload plants.